So this will be the second time this year alone that Eva Green will be in a movie based on a book by Frank Miller. And she's also playing a villain in it, and she also gets really naked in it. I'm sensing a pattern here. Sin City: A Dame to Kill For is directed by Frank Miller and Robert Rodriguez. It's written by Frank Miller and it stars again a lot of people, a few of whom are Josh Brolin, Eva Green, Dennis Haysbert, Rosario Dawson, Jessica Alba, Bruce Willis, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Powers Booth, and Mickey Rourke. Sin City: A Dame to Kill For starts off with this really short segment called Just Another Saturday Night that has Marv, played by Mickey Rourke, going after a bunch of frat boys. Then your main story here is A Dame to Kill For, which has pre-facial reconstruction Dwight, now played by Josh Brolin, who is suddenly contacted again by his mysterious and seductive former lover Ava, played by Eva Green, who is asking him for help. Then the last two stories in this movie are originals written by Frank Miller for this movie. The first one is split into two parts. It's called The Long Bad Night, that has this young gambler named Johnny, played by Joseph Gordon-Levitt, coming to Sin City and challenging the extremely powerful Senator Rourke in a game of poker. And your last story here is called Nancy's Last Dance, that takes place 4 years after the events of That Yellow Bastard, and has Nancy, played by Jessica Alba, kind of, vying for revenge against Senator Rourke. Now, Sin City: A Dame to Kill For was supposed to start production, I think, in like 2006, a year after the first one, but it's now been 9 years and we're finally getting it. So that was the first red flag for me. And like I mentioned a while ago, half the stories in this movie are originals written by Frank Miller for the screen, and the last time he wrote something for the screen didn't really end up very well, so that was another red flag for me. So do these red flags really kind of impede the quality of this movie? Well, I think that A Dame to Kill For has, the same great visual style of the first one. It has lots of good performances, but the stories are just not interesting in my opinion. This movie as a whole really just lacks impact. Of course, the stylized green screen is still there. It still highlights these characters in front of like a really static world, which is a really cool effect. And it still works in making things kind of melancholic and in a way scary. Like there's still some kind of frightening or like really morbid parts in this movie. You still got a lot of use of like really stark colors that really highlight important details, or they again make morbid things like really strangely beautiful in a way. Like the things I'm thinking of right now are when people have like wounds on their faces and stuff. It's really just kind of highlighted just to kind of really show that their faces are kind of being torn up. I would say that there are fewer like really meticulously framed shots here, and they're not as impressive as the ones in the first movie. However, I do think that their shots here are a bit artsier in a way, and they're more creatively filmed. Like I don't know how to describe them, but there's certain shots in there that are like really kind of crazy and creative, and it's fun to look at. Although I find it weird in terms of visuals that what happened to Mickey Rourke's face? Like his Marv makeup is kind of bloated. I don't know why. But pretty visuals can't really save this movie, I think, because the stories, like I mentioned, just aren't fulfilling or hard hitting at all. For one, in A Dame to Kill For, the main story, I get that the graphic novel version was kind of praised heavily, I think. But the internal conflicts going on in that movie between the characters, you just really don't feel it. Doesn't really come through. Because that story is really about Dwight and him trying to keep like the beast inside him, and he keeps repeating that, but you never really get the sense that this dude is capable really of being doing terrible things. Like you saw it in Clive Owen in the first movie. Here, you don't really see it that much, and the relationship he has with Eva Green, you don't really feel the conflicting emotions. You don't really feel like Josh Brolin is really fighting to stop from loving this woman. I wouldn't really place it on Josh Brolin though, because the writing itself, it just doesn't allow for these deeper things to come out. The Long Bad Night has real potential, I think, because it's such a fresh kind of new story in Sin City, because it has like kind of a happy-go-lucky protagonist in Johnny, played by Joseph Gordon-Levitt. But as much as it had potential at the beginning, it went absolutely nowhere. Like when it hit the second part, nothing happens in the story. It's a waste of having, this kind of fresh new look at Sin City from Johnny, and it doesn't add anything to Senator Rourke's character. He's the main antagonist in this story, and you don't really learn anything about him. Nancy's Last Dance does a lot of cool stuff with Nancy, though. She definitely has like the most development among any of the characters in this movie. However, I do think that the development is just a bit rushed. Like, I wanted to feel the gradual transformation of Nancy from like this innocent girl to someone who's kind of like Hardigan by the end. And speaking of Hardigan, he's completely like, I feel like he was just so shoehorned into this movie just so we could have Bruce Willis. And when he pops up, he just pops up for like random reasons. You don't really understand why he's there. He's kind of Deus Ex Machina ish. And I'm glad Marv is around. He's in like most of these stories, but I feel like he was just reduced to like being a hired gun, like a hired muscle. And that might be what he's like in the comics, but if that's what he's like, then I don't like that because I enjoyed so much in The Hard Goodbye that, he had like real depth to him. But here he's just a dude who gets drunk and then beats a bunch of people. Now, talking about the stories as a whole, I feel like there's something a bit off about the structure, and that's one of the gripes I usually have with a lot of anthology films. Like, I usually like to rearrange them and think, okay, it would have worked better this way. For one, just Another Saturday Night at the very beginning feels completely unnecessary because it doesn't bookend things like how in the first movie the customer is always right bookended the thing. So it felt like, at least it's the beginning and the end. But here, it's just the beginning and then like nothing happens. So it's kind of strange again. Now, my main complaint about the structure though is that Dame to Kill For should have been last. It's the longest. I think it takes up way too much time actually, but it is like the main story, so I feel like it should have been at the end. Had real potential for being the most emotional also, but that didn't happen. The Long Bad Night had no reason to be split into two because the second part was so disappointing. But that actually also kind of made it feel unnecessary because Nancy's Last Dance already has a conflict with Senator Rourke, so it's kind of weird to see Senator Rourke in another story where he's not as menacing. And if they wanted to keep Nancy's Last Dance as the ending, they should have made it longer also because it feels strangely it feels the most important because it really is following directly from events of the first movie. Now, in terms of acting, Josh Brolin and Eva Green really do the best they can with this material, although it's not very good material. So, ultimately, their performances aren't very memorable. Although you can really see Brolin really trying to have that whole conflicting stuff, and Eva Green's always good at playing like a seductive, evil snake. Jessica Alba is not that bad in this movie. Like, I know some people don't like her acting. She's decent in this movie, although she clearly has kind of a harder time with the more emotional stuff before she kind of transforms into like a killing machine. Joseph Gordon-Levitt, I think, has the best performance here. He really reaffirms his versatility and his charm, really, because he starts his story off being really charming and stuff, and then you get to see his anger and whatever. So he pulls that off like really well, and he, I think, actually managed to stay memorable despite his lackluster story. And of course, Mickey Rourke is just he lives this character's skin. He's having so much fun as always. It's great to have him around, although I wish he had much more to do. Now, about the direction from Frank Miller and Robert Rodriguez, I just feel like it's either they lost their touch after so many years, or really the stories themselves just did not accommodate for the same kind of delirious style that they had. I'm inclined to think the latter because, the subject matter of these stories, it's not as violent, I think, as in the first movie. I guess poker and romance really just aren't their strong suits. I think they did the best job with Nancy's Last Dance, but it really did have potential. But Nancy's transformation or her development just wasn't built up well enough for it to really pay off in the end. So in the end, despite looking pretty and having good performances here and there, Sin City: A Dame to Kill For, it's just a kind of mediocre movie. Strangely, for the release in the Philippines, they cut like a bunch of decapitations and stuff. But even if they cut a bunch of the violence, I could still see like the flaws even in the non-violent scenes. That's why I'm still sticking to my rating. And I start to think like maybe in the next one they could fix their mistakes. But I really would like to just for them to keep it at just one movie. Like I feel like this is just a movie that should have been pulled off just once and just stay there. I mean, Sin City is still great as it is. Anyway, that is my review for Sin City: A Dame to Kill For. Have you guys seen it? What do you think about it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whether you agree with me or not, please leave me a comment. Let's have a conversation.